Hey guys, it's Haley and welcome to another bookish video. Today I have yet another installation in my top 12 recommendation series. This is probably my favorite series to film right now, so expect a lot of these over the next few months. And as always, leave down below what other kind of top 12 recommendations do you want to see? I have my top 12 slashers in the works, as well as my top 12 psychological horror books in the works too. But today we're going straight for the top, and that is with my top 12 favorite horror books of all time. I really tried to look at the books that have impacted my reading the most, that come to my mind first. So this isn't just gonna be like the craziest 5-star books. I will be doing a top 12 extreme horror at some point. I do also have a top 12 most disturbing books that I've ever read video already, but in this video, it's kind of gonna be the top 12 books that shaped my horror taste, and they're just overall my top 12 favorites of all time. But before we get into the books, I do want to tell you a little bit about today's sponsor, which is Shortform. You guys have probably heard me talk about Shortform before. I really love their service. They are an app and a website where you can go read really detailed book summaries and analyses. And you're probably wondering, why would I do that when I could just read the book? Well, I think this is really, really handy for nonfiction, because you read a nonfiction book and a lot of the time you want to remember those like core ideas without having to reread another book and dedicate, another week or however long it took you to read it the first time around to getting those main ideas back. And that is exactly what Shortform does, is it just gives you all of those main points that you're wanting to remember and connect those pieces back with additional analysis. I also think it's great for if you're in school, if you're writing a paper and you're wanting to vet out sources that might be good to use in your paper as references. So you're not having to actually read through books or waste time and money checking out or buying books that don't actually get to the point that you're wanting to get across. With Shortform, you can look at that quick summary and see if that would be a book that would help you or not. They have all kinds of categories of books on there. Obviously, my favorite is the psychology/self-help section. I absolutely love that for just like going over things quickly before I start my day of sessions with my clients. It is so helpful. I love, love, love How to Do the Work by Nicole LaPera. She's really, really similar to me and how we work with clients. So having that quick refresher is really helpful. They also do have fiction books on there. Of course, we learn beautiful life lessons and examine gorgeous metaphors in fiction books. So those are available too if you want more in-depth analysis on maybe one of your favorite fiction books. They have a lot of bestsellers on there. I also love the art and design category. That one is just interesting to me. I would never really dedicate time to picking up a book like that, but looking at the summaries is super interesting to me. So Shortform has a lot of great uses. If you're wanting to check it out, I will link it down below. You can go to my link, which is just shortform.com/Haley, and get 20% off an annual membership as well as a free trial. So before you even purchase anything, you can see if it is something that is going to work for you. I highly recommend it. Thank you so much to Shortform for sponsoring this video. And now let's go ahead and get into my top 12 horror books of all time. Also, so sorry, forgot to mention, I'm sorry if you can hear my washer in the background. I'm a multitasking queen, okay? We gotta do laundry and film at the same time, so apologize for that noise. But the first book on this list is one of the first horror books that I ever read, and it's one that still really, really has stuck with me, and that is Carrie by Stephen King. I know that there are a lot more in-depth and nuanced conversations we can have about Stephen King, but putting all of that to the side right now, I love this book. It did so much for me as a young girl who was kind of in similar, not as extreme, but similar bullying kind of exclusionary situations as Carrie was in the book. And just seeing that feminine rage for the first time in literature when she unleashes her powers at the prom, I mean, it was just everything for me. I love every adaptation of the book to movie. Also love Carrie the musical, just everything Carrie, Carrie, Carrie. I even think that Tiffany D. Jackson took this story structure and improved upon it in The Weight of Blood, which was one of my favorite books of 2022. But I had to put the original on here just to pay homage to that and to Stephen King, who has done so much for the horror genre, even though, you know, we can talk about flaws as well too. That is valid. If you're not sure what Carrie is about, let me go ahead and tell you. It is about a girl who is living in a pretty tough situation. She has an abusive mother and she's facing a lot of bullying at school. So when she gets her period in front of her peers, it is like the worst thing that could ever happen to her. And all of these intricate, nuanced social dynamics between these teenagers are just building and building and building up until everything culminates at prom night, where Carrie cannot take it anymore, and her powers of telekinesis that she's been exploring throughout the book come to a head in this huge massacre at the prom. I know a lot of people have issues with Stephen King portraying menstruation and women's issues, which usually, y'all know me, I would have an issue with that. I don't know if it's because I read this when I was younger and I didn't have that kind of lens when I read it, but I didn't see a huge issue with it. I know that his wife actually informed a lot of the choices that he made with the actual writing of those scenes. So I don't know. This one is definitely up for criticism. I see that, I hear that, it's totally valid, but it had to be first on my list because of the nostalgia factor and because it's one of the books that got me into the genre. Next up, let's talk about You've Lost a Lot of Blood by Eric LaRocca. I absolutely love this book. Okay, one thing you have to know about me is I love a book that feels like a fever dream, but somehow you know what you're meant to know leaving. You might not know what happened, but you know what it means, if that makes sense. And that is exactly how I felt when I finished this book. We are kind of having a dual timeline here. In one timeline, we are following this couple. They are a gay couple and they're going through this like relationship dynamic where we're not sure what's going on with them. We just know we're looking at little relics of the relationship. The back it captures it perfectly. It says, "Each precious thing that I show you in this book is a holy relic from the night we both perished. The night when I combed you from my hair and watered the moon with your blood, and you've lost a lot of blood." Like, we're just seeing this relationship kind of fall apart before our eyes. And one of the guys in the relationship is an author. So he is taking us through this story that he's writing as well in alternating chapters. And I love a book within a book trope. If a book has a book within a book trope, you can probably bet that I'm going to be obsessed with it. And I really love that story. It's a little bit more sci-fi. It brings in that magical realism that I love. This book was just a recipe for all the things that I love in a horror book. And yes, it is crazy. Yes, it does feel like a fever dream. But when I closed the book, it made me want to read it all over again because the feeling that washed over me and the meaning that I took from it was just unlike any other book that I have read. So this is a easy 5-star for me. And Eric LaRocca has quickly become one of my very favorite authors. Let's talk about Invisible Monsters Remix specifically by Chuck Palahniuk. Okay, this book for me was like a cultural reset, okay? Something rewired my brain. When I read this book, I was so blown away and intrigued, and I feel like I don't talk about this book that much, but I read it last year and it was so easily one of my favorites of 2021. It was so interesting, and if you do decide to pick up this book, you have to get the remix version, okay? Invisible Monsters, I've never read. This structure really did it for me, and it is the book Invisible Monsters, but all out of order. So you're reading the plot out of order. Like, you'll have a chapter and then at the end it'll say, please jump to chapter 36. And obviously we just read chapter 18. So you're just like going back and forth. And then at the end of that, it says, please jump to chapter 8. Like, you're moving around the book to where you lose your sense of time and you feel like you're just in this weird, wacky world with these zany characters. You lose all sense of time. It is such a trip. But basically, we are following this model, and she got in this horrible accident, left her face disfigured, and she just does not know how to move on. She's in the hospital recovering from her facial reconstruction surgery, and there's also like some other mental things that she has going on. She obviously has a lot of mental health things. That was a very traumatic thing that happened to her, and she's connecting with these other people in the hospital and just like other characters that she encounters. We jump around in time from before the accident, during and right after the accident, and then way post the accident, and kind of seeing how this experience, this traumatic experience, changed her life and changes how she interacts with the world. It is so interesting. It is so queer. It is so odd, and it brings this like air, like that's the only way that I can describe it, is this like atmosphere, very similar to You've Lost a Lot of Blood. There's just this atmosphere that the book creates where you know exactly what the character's saying without them having to say it like point blank, period. I'm obsessed with it. I'm never not going to be obsessed with it. Again, I've heard that this author is not the best person in the world, so buy this book secondhand and read the remixed version of it because it's so good. Next up, we have a book that I just read in 2022 and probably the most disgusting book I've ever read, and that is The Ruins by Scott Smith. I believe this is a classic. Okay, this is a horror classic. If I was a teacher, I would assign this for like children to read in school. Like, it's just a masterclass in gore and in body horror. It is a survival story about these 6 college kids on vacation who go to Mexico, and they are interacting, doing these little excursions, but not really being the most respectful. Imagine that. So out of our realm of imagination. No, it's like a very common thing. Because they're not respecting the environment and the history and the culture and the place where they are, it starts to take revenge on them, and they are trying to survive it being stuck in this wilderness-esque kind of place and get out alive. It is so high stakes. You feel like you are the one fighting for survival the entire time. If you've seen the movie adaptation, this one just is so different from the movie. The movie's just like campy slasher, early 2000s horror vibes. This has a lot more depth to it, and I also vomited while reading this book. It was that gross and that intense. I've never thrown up because of a book before or since reading this. So if that tells you how intense the horror is, there you go. Next up, we have Night Film by Marisha Pessl, and we're going back to that same atmosphere with this book. It creates what feels like a fever dream. It is the epitome of show me, don't tell me. Some people could think that that's pretentious or that it means nothing because you really don't know what it means, but I love that this kind of a story is up for your own interpretation. It starts out as like this really simple mystery plot that we're seeing unfolding. This guy is suspicious about the death of this girl who is the daughter of this like famous cult horror movie maker guy. And he's like, they're saying that this girl committed suicide. I'm pretty sure she didn't. So he starts looking into it, and he meets this kind of like a zany cast of characters along the way that are helping him investigate. Weirdest pairing ever, like the people that are going along with him to help him investigate. It's so funny to like watch these character dynamics. It's also very heartwarming in a way. I don't know. I love the characters in this book. And the setting is interesting too. They end up like breaking into this estate where the horror movie maker lives and shoots his horror movies. And those scenes are some of the best scenes I've ever read in any horror book. It is just absolutely phenomenal. It has lore in there for like horror movie lovers. It has that mystery element, and it has that fever dream horror that all comes together for this masterpiece of a book. I would love to reread this one just to feel how I felt reading it again, because I haven't felt that way reading a book before or since. Like, it's just so unique. The books on this list really do create a whole other world and atmosphere. Next up, let's jump back into Stephen King. This is my last King on this list, rest assured. We have Pet Sematary, and there's just nothing like this book, okay? If you are interested in grief horror, if you like grief horror, if you can handle grief horror right now, this is just the epitome. Like, there's nothing better to me than Pet Sematary. It is the story of this family who moves into this house right on a really busy highway. So pets get killed on the road all the time, unfortunately, and they bury them in the pet cemetery. One day this happens to their beloved cat. They bury it in the cemetery, and kitty comes back to life. So there are more far-reaching implications about this little cemetery and the power that it possibly holds. And we're seeing kind of how humans will push the limits of what's given to them if they're in pain and if they're grieving, and if all of these factors come together. It is just really more of a deep dive into grief and the emotions that are horrifying to experience as a human being, rather than like, ooh, spooky horror kind of vibes. But it is really masterfully done, and I loved the audiobook. This is probably my favorite audiobook I've ever listened to. It's narrated by Michael C. Hall, who played Dexter, and he's just phenomenal at reading the story and really acting it out. Oh my gosh, it was such a phenomenal reading experience. I read it in Halloween month, October last year, and oh my gosh, it was phenomenal. I cannot recommend it enough. This is a classic horror book that I feel like is actually worth it. Let's get into one that you guys were probably expecting on this list. I don't know how you could not expect it to be on this list, because this is probably my favorite horror book of all time, point blank period. I'm just gonna stick it right in the middle here because everyone needs to hear about this. If you're just clicking through the video, you need to see this book, you need to read it. If you are just watching the first half, you need to see this book. If you're just watching the second half or whatever, I need everyone to pay attention right now. This is important. Brother by Anya Alborn. Come on. Need I say more? This book caused me to go into hyperfixation mode, okay? I couldn't do anything for like 3 days after I read this book other than think about this book, Google things about this book, read other things that are similar to this book, watch other content like movies that inspired this book or are similar to this book, or I am obsessed with this book. We are following this cannibalistic, murderous family in the middle of nowhere country bumpkinville, and we think that it's just gonna be like another Texas Chainsaw Massacre when it opens up. But it is not that. It is a slasher, and it is gory, and there are like weird cannibal, animal cruelty things in there. So yes, it is gruesome. It does bring that level, which I really appreciated. But beyond that, it has this gorgeous character development where we are really in our main character's head grappling with the same moral dilemma that he is. The guy that we're following was actually adopted into the family. He was not born into this family. They actually just incorporated him into the family after he was kidnapped. This isn't who he was meant to be. He could have been a very different person and grown up a very different way, but he has this path destined in front of him that his family has, which is becoming a cannibalistic, crazy rapist murderer. And he's like, do I want to do that? I don't know. It's what I've been taught. I don't know how I could escape this fate, but it doesn't feel right to me anymore. So we're on this kind of coming of age journey with this boy as he discovers that the path laid out for him is not going to work. And it's a big metaphor. I think I read it at a good time in my life where I could hold the space for what is beyond the horror. But the horror is amazing as well. It's a very character-driven story, so if you don't like that, you probably won't like this, but I love character-driven stories, so I didn't mind that at all. And it is quite predictable as well, but again, that's not what I read this book for. So highly, highly, highly recommend it. Could not possibly sing its praises higher or more. I think this is a masterpiece. A recent favorite that really took me by surprise and I have not stopped thinking about since I read it in October is Below by Laurel Hightower. This is just a teeny tiny little novella that I thought was going to be, you know, just another horror novella that I read and moved on from, but no, this one has stuck with me. It created that same atmosphere where it feels like a fever dream, but I feel like this one is a little bit more rooted in reality than some of the other ones I've talked about. So if you've read something like Night Film or you've Lost a Lot of Blood on my recommendation and you feel like, that didn't quite connect, I need something a little bit more rooted in reality, maybe try Below. As you can see from the cover, there is some Mothman content in here, and I love that, kind of like taking those classic horror story vignettes and putting them into horror books. I think it's so fun because this is the kind of stuff that gets you into horror when you're a horror lover, you know, as a child watching lost tapes on the Animal Planet about Mothman and Bigfoot and the Chupacabra, like, I'm in. So we're following this girl who is driving to this like vacation spot on these treacherous snowy roads, and this trucker is like, hey, I see that you're having trouble on the roads. Let me just guide your way and I'll follow you the whole way. Make sure you get to your destination safely. And of course that's terrifying to just like be a woman having this offer of a man being like, I'll follow you exactly where you're going. But she's so scared that she takes it. And then a tragedy happens on the road where it puts both of their lives in danger. And she has to make this decision. Does she abandon this guy and leave him for dead who was so willing to help her? Or does she stay and try to help the person that risked his life for her? And there are all kinds of magical realism elements. There are all kinds of twists. There is this crazy, trippy atmosphere. It's so fast-paced. I'm obsessed with this book. I love it so much. And I read another book by Laurel Hightower recently that I loved as well. Not to like all-time favorite status, but I also just think it's her writing that's really effective for me. Y'all had to have known there was going to be a Grady Hendrix book in here. My Best Friend's Exorcism. Oh my gosh, this book just makes me smile when I see the cover. It is one of my favorite books of all time, horror or otherwise. This is one of the only horror books that has brought me to tears because it captures the essence of that like coming of age, nostalgic feeling. It's set in the 80s around this group of girlfriends who are just, you know, getting up to whatever 80s girls do, drinking wine coolers and gagging with a spoon. And one of these girls gets possessed. And you follow her as the friend group tries to navigate that. You feel the emotions of our main character as she's trying to save her best friend. This story just speaks to the magic and the power of female friendship and what a girl will do, the lengths that she will go for her best friends. It is so heartwarming in that way, but the horror is also really effective. I just cannot tell you how strongly I felt the emotions of these characters. I love a possession story. It's definitely giving like The Exorcist, The Ring vibes where people's heads are doing a 360 and they're vomiting on the wall. So if you like that kind of horror, you will definitely like this. And the 80s setting mixed with like the female friendship vibes, it's unbeatable. It's also a perfect read for the summer. It has great summery vibes. I actually have another repeat author on this list, not just Stephen King, and that is Eric LaRocca. I absolutely love their work, especially this teensy tiny little baby called They Were Here Before Us. This is a short story collection, but it kind of has like a theme, this like central theme running throughout it that really spoke to me very similar to The Ruins. I love themes of like how nature is going to get its revenge. That's something that I really discovered about my horror taste this year. And that's what all of these stories are about. The intersection of the human world and the natural world, and where we meet, how we interact, how we help and hurt each other. There is a story about a family of beetles, and I think about it at least once a week. Like, it lives in my brain rent free. Every time I see a bug since I have read this book, I have a thought. Every time I've seen a bird since I've read this book, I've had a thought that just takes me back to this reading experience. And that's how I know that some piece of literature really, really deeply affected me. So I am here for this book 100%. Some stories I've heard are hit or miss for people. I loved every single one, but it's really just that meaning that sticks with you that I think makes the book worth reading. It's also like 100 pages. Like, come on, give it a try. Also, it's gorgeosity. I love the look of this book and the illustrations throughout as well. Like, hello. How is something so gruesome and disgusting also so beautiful? That just captures this book in all of its entirety. Another recent read, well, I guess it was like 7 months ago, but I think about it so often that it feels recent. That is One Bloody Thing After Another by Joey Como. I absolutely love this one. You've probably heard me talk it to death at this point, since it was one of my favorites from this past year. In this book, we are following a young girl as she comes to terms with her queer feelings. She ends up having a crush on her best friend, and it's something that's really hard for her to conceptualize. It really vexes her, and the only way that she can deal with it is by like acting out in these big, bloody things one after another, hence the title. And she as a character, I just love her. She is feminine rage personified. She is internalized homophobia personified, and she just unleashes everything. Like, it kind of gives me Carrie, the way that she's just like, ah, I need these feelings out of my body. I need everyone around me to feel the absolute depth of how I'm feeling because I cannot hold it any longer. And I think we've all had times where we felt like that. Following her journey is just so interesting. This is another one where it just like transports you to this weird, horrifying world, and you watch these weird things happen and they kind of don't make sense, but at the same time, you totally understand what's going on and what it means. And I think you can kind of take your own meaning from this as well. We follow a whole cast of zany characters again. I feel like I'm saying all the same things, but this is what makes one of my favorite horror books, so it kind of tracks. There are things about pets in here. I love pet horror, hence the past few books I've talked about. Gosh, all these books are the same, but I'm staying very on brand. Absolutely love it. Cannot sing its praises high enough. And the final book on this list is the book that got me into extreme horror, and I have McKay to thank. I love you, bestie. Thank you so much for giving me this recommendation. Survivor by J.F. Gonzalez, and I know that this one is hard to find. It is currently out of print, but hopefully somehow you can get your hands on a copy because it is absolutely phenomenal. It's absolutely depraved, okay? It's one of the most graphic and disgusting, horrifying pieces of literature that I've ever read, but it does it in a way that, especially since reading more extreme horror and really diving into the genre in the past couple years, I really respect. It's really easy to have an icky, uncomfortable feeling reading extreme horror because of obviously the extreme content. I think it is much, much harder to create empathy while you're reading an extreme horror book, and that is the main feeling that I felt while reading this book. Of course, it is high stakes and it is fast paced, and there's this like almost like underlying thriller plot, but there's also empathy in some of the most disgusting things I've ever read about. We are following this woman who is kidnapped on her anniversary trip, and the kidnappers tell her, we don't want your money, we don't want anything from you, you are going to be the star of our snuff film. Yeah, pretty intense, pretty horrifying, probably every woman's worst nightmare. And along the way, she is trying to escape, hence survivor. She will be a survivor out of this situation. But in order to survive, she has to do a lot of morally gray and just downright horrible things. And we don't know. It's a big moral dilemma the whole time to see, like, whose side are we on? Everyone is horrible, but somehow you still have understanding for why everyone is horrible. This like depth of empathy that I felt while reading something so horrid was so perplexing and intriguing to me. So I loved the deeper aspects of this book, of course, but I feel like I also need to emphasize how crazy this book is. I have never been so scared reading a book since Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. Like, I was checking the locks, I was looking behind me, I couldn't turn the lights out before I went to sleep. This book was horrifying. It is horrible. Please don't go into this lightly. Please heed my warning. There is every trigger warning in the book for this piece of literature. But if you can handle it, it is so, so worth it, especially if you like intense horror like myself. It just doesn't get better than this. At least not that I've seen. No extreme horror book has ever measured up to this standard. Unfortunately and fortunately, I read this one first, so I feel like nothing will ever top it, but that's just the way that the cookie crumbles, and I'm so glad that I read it and I know how wonderful the genre can be. So that is it. Those are my top 12 favorite horror books of all time. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thank you so, so much for watching, and thank you again to Shortform for sponsoring this video. If you want to check them out and get 20% off, again, I will have that link down below. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And don't forget to go to therapy and read a book this week. I will see you in my next video, guys. Bye!